All right, greetings, everybody. This is your chapter on the bureaucracy in Unit 3, and this is our third institution of government. Remember, we started with Congress. Important thing, Congress is where laws are made. That's where people are represented by population in the House, all states represented equally in the Senate. The president is the captain of the ship. We elect a president because we like the direction they're advocating for that the country go. But the president has to work with Congress in order to be able to truly implement that vision. The president does have some powers, like executive orders, that are unilateral, but mostly the president is advised by thousands of people to ensure that whatever actions we take, whatever actions the president takes, are based on the best information possible. So when we talk about the laws that are passed and the executive orders that the president signs and the actions that the president wants done, we have to talk about the bureaucracy, because this is the human power. This is the expertise that really makes our government run. This is our federal workforce. They're called civil servants. They work for the federal government. They're non-political. You can be employed by the federal government, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, in the rank and file civil service. I have 2 students right now that I'm helping through the federal hiring process. I think that's real exciting that they want to get involved in their federal government in that way, because there are plenty of career opportunities there. When we talked about the president's cabinet, remember, those are the heads of the agencies that make up the bureaucracy, all those different departments that are divided up in specific public policy areas: agriculture, transportation, education, defense, justice, and the list goes on. You don't have to know all of them, but you have to understand what it is that they do, and why we have such a large federal workforce. This is where our nation's expertise is. If you think about a computer, you can buy a lot of software to make your computer do this and that and the other, play games and, I don't know, animate stuff, whatever. But you have to have the hard drive capacity to run those programs, right? So if you think about the president and Congress, these are elected officials. Presidents go every 4 to 8 years because of term limits. Members of Congress don't have term limits, but, they die, they don't get reelected, they get caught with a hooker and kicked out of office. I mean, all kinds of stuff. So Congress and the presidency is ever changing. Where is the consistency of information? Where is all of our history of the Middle East, or public education, or our relationship with China, or how the economy works? What's going to stimulate the economy? What's going to cause inflation? We've got to have a static, consistent workforce of people who have dedicated their careers to specific public policy areas. And that's what the bureaucracy is. The cabinet members, the secretaries that are the heads of each one of these departments, are appointed by the president upon the president's election and confirmed by the Senate. So they come and go, but it's the federal workforce that is there toiling day after day after day to help implement laws and help enforce laws. I mean, you can pass laws all day long, but if you don't have anybody there to make sure people are following the rules, it doesn't matter. I don't know if any of y'all have ever driven in Mexico. I don't anymore, but I used to all the time. I lived down in Puebla for a while. And then, of course, I've lived here along the border on and off for a long time, too. And, you drive around in a Mexican city and you get to a stoplight that's green, and there's also a stop sign there. And you're like, I don't know what to do with this. I guess I'll just go, There's lanes, but people aren't necessarily driving in their lanes. And there's a speed limit, but people aren't necessarily abiding by it. And it's kind of chaotic. The bus is supposed to come at 10, but It may not get there till 11. It's just because there's really no bureaucracy right now within the Mexican system to actually implement and enforce laws. I mean, now, giving you an example of enforcement, what does implementation mean? Implement means getting started. When I was 15, growing up in South Louisiana, we used to go to Florida. That Floribama Shore show that's on MTV, I think? That was our redneck Riviera. I was one of those kids on that Floribama Shore. Not really, but I was like one of them. So we'd get on I-10 and, go to Florida for the summers and for softball tournaments and this, that, and the other. And the speed limit was 55 miles an hour, which I know today it's just like, what? But yeah, cars weren't as safe. The roads weren't as safe. There was a fuel shortage. And that just seemed like a reasonably safe national speed limit. And as cars became more fuel efficient, as roads became safer, as cars became safer, as people started wearing seatbelts and airbags and this, that, and other, because people run this country, people got together and started contacting their federal elected officials in the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate and said, hey, can y'all please raise the speed limit? It's just too slow now. And guess what? A bill was passed into law that raised the speed limit to 65. And I'll never forget, we were going down to Orange Beach, Alabama, which is right there on the Floribama line, again, where the Floribama Shore is recorded. And we were like, oh my God, we can drive 65, which means you can really drive 70 and not get stopped. And it was seamless. And this seems really simple, but think about it. Think about taking up all the 55 mile an hour speed limit signs all over the country and all the interstates and highways, it's 50 states and 6 territories, and seamlessly replacing them with the correct signs that were all uniform and reflective and the right height and put in the right place. Who made all those signs? What are you going to do with all the old ones? Who mapped it all out? Who put the bids out? It's a humongous undertaking. And without the Department of Transportation working in conjunction with the cities to implement the new speed limit, you might have a 55 mile sign here or 65 mile over there, or this state only has 55 mile an hour speed limits. There's no consistency. So without a bureaucracy, without the human power, even the simplest, least controversial pieces of legislation, like raising the speed limit, is going to be impossible. And that's what you see in a lot of countries whose governments struggle. They struggle economically. They struggle with law enforcement. They struggle with civil society. This is because there's no human power there to prioritize consistency and implementation. Another important function of the bureaucracy is that these subject matter experts in the Department of Agriculture and Homeland Security and Defense and Justice and Transportation and Education all advise members of Congress and advise the president on the issues specific to their public policy areas. Now, I'll give you an example. This is kind of a true example, but I'm kind of, elaborating a little bit, so don't go look it up and go, when did this happen? Because I'm making it easier for you. A bridge falls down, and fortunately nobody's hurt, but a piece of a bridge collapses. And it has to be rebuilt, but it's on an interstate, which means it's federal. Okay, so because interstates are federal installations, the federal government maintains them. So this happens in Texas. Who comes along and rebuilds this bridge? How does that happen? Do the bridge ferries come along and just start, we need to rebuild this bridge? No, where do you get the money? Where do you get the materials? How do you get the new blueprints for a more enhanced, structurally sound bill. Who does that? The Department of Transportation does that. And my state representative, because remember, all things that deal with money have to start in the House, my U.S. representative, because all things that have to deal with money have to start in the House of Representatives. And this is going to cost money to rebuild. It's a big bridge. So my representative has to file a bill to get money appropriated, meaning designated, to rebuild this bridge. And I go to my representative and I say, I hope you get this bridge rebuilt soon, because, my place where I work is right on the other side. And I can't continue to take this ferry back and forth. It takes too long. So my representative says, yeah, I really need to do that. But heck, I don't know how to build a bridge. I don't know what is needed. I don't know what this process is. Well, what does that representative do? He gets one of his staff, like somebody like me, and they call the Department of Transportation and they say, hey, I need to speak to the person who's in charge of the unit that maintains bridges over freshwater rivers. And they're like, okay, we'll find that person. So they get them to that unit, and the staff person for the representative says, look, we had this bridge collapse. We need to get it rebuilt as soon as possible. We need to get the money allocated. Where do we start? Well, we'll start with an estimation of how much it's going to cost. I can get that to you in 24 hours. And so the person puts together, okay, we're going to need this much material, this much human power, this many workers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he puts together a bid, and it's $10 million. And he gives it to the representative staff, and they're like, okay, this is what we need to draw up this piece of legislation so that we can submit it to the Speaker of the House, so that we can get this through as soon as possible, so that we can get this money designated and start building this bridge again. What if you didn't have that human power? When I was having to do this kind of work, I did this all the time. I'd have to call, this agency or that department in order to advise my boss, the senator, on what needed to happen. Because just like no person comes into the presidency knowing how all this stuff works, these members of Congress, whether they're representatives or senators, they don't know how everything works either. Certainly they have their areas of expertise. I mean, you have doctors and lawyers and teachers and law enforcement officers and mothers and, disabled people. I mean, yeah, all these people have a certain amount of expertise and a certain amount of vision, or else they wouldn't be in those positions. But as far as like rebuilding a bridge, I don't know how to do that. So that's why we need the bureaucracy to advise the president, to advise the Congress on how to put together pieces of legislation that do what they need to do based on their specific subject matter expertise in that particular public policy area. So what you need to remember about the bureaucracy, remember implements, meaning, like those signs, those speed signs, implements legislation, enforces legislation, being sure that people are following the rules. That when you buy a Diet Coke, you're really not buying a bottle of bourbon. Implements and enforces legislation and advises Congress and the presidency using their subject matter expertise. Okay? So if you take some notes and pay attention to those specific pieces of information, I think you'll have enough to work with so that you can include the bureaucracy in your assignments for Unit 3.